We all know there's a lot of money in Oregon politics, but what about local races like the Portland City Council elections? Well, candidates do raise a lot of money, but if they qualify for Portland's small donor elections program, most of their campaign funding can actually come from the city itself.
Any Portlander who gives a participating candidate up to $20 gets their contribution matched 9-1. We like to say the city adds a zero.
And Multnomah County told us they didn't have enough time to open cold weather shelters during the snow earlier this week. Well, now they're getting their act together ahead of another snowstorm. Yes, you heard that right. More snow possible in April. Here's the story. I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. All the ways to communicate with us right there at the bottom of your screen. You can email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com. You can use the hashtag TheStoryKGW on Twitter or leave us a voicemail. Just call our number, 503-226-5090. Let's begin with the chilly weather outside. I can't see from here if it's snowing at this moment, but I know it was off and on in the West Hills of Portland today, maybe outside your window as well. Yesterday, I railed a little bit, just sharing my opinion on Multnomah County's lumbering response to the cold and snow on Sunday night, when they did not open their emergency shelters for the homeless. Tonight, thankfully, the shelters are opening. Now, I don't know if any of you called county leaders or emailed, but if you did, it likely helped. And many of you did email me and left voicemails sharing my outrage and agreeing the county does need to move faster, responding to severe weather emergencies.
I totally agree with your comments on emergency shelters. We did know that this was coming, and even though maybe snow didn't come, we knew it was going to be terribly cold. They should have a group of volunteers that they can just send an email to saying we need your help immediately. Portlanders would do that because that's what they do.
We've known for several days that it was going to be cold, that the possibility of snow existed, and if we're able to pull our plants in to keep them from getting damaged, why couldn't Multnomah County take care of human beings? I find that absolutely inexcusable.
There you go. To be transparent, as we like to say these days, not all of you agreed, and some of you did take me to task for not understanding how much work it takes to get an emergency shelter up and running as the cold weather comes in. Well, I hear you, and thank you for your comments and for taking time to fill me in on that. But my response is the county still can move faster. Part of that would be getting rid of their silly practice of only checking the forecast in the morning, which is what they said they did on Sunday, and then only checking the National Weather Service. Listen, all of the major TV stations in town have professional meteorologists. Now, of course, none are as good at the other stations as they are right here on KGW, but any of them could have told you Sunday afternoon that snow was coming. Sort of reminds me of the laid-back posture of the state and of the federal housing folks as that heat dome approached and hit last summer. Once it happened, they were behind in trying to catch up the entire time, and it always seemed like they were too late. Our government agencies need to lean forward more to be ready for severe weather and vigilant for emergencies even when we don't expect it to really happen. I guess that's another piece of my mind that I'm sharing on that. I am glad tonight Multnomah County is opening the shelters. Much better to err on the side of caution when lives are possibly at risk. Now let's turn to our big story and a discussion about money and politics. And no matter where you live, you have a chance to contribute to your favorite candidate's campaign. But let me ask you something. Do you? For most of us, the answer is no. Why not? Well, it's because most of us feel like the relatively small amount that we can give will make no difference compared to the big checks that corporations or the millionaires can write. That, in turn, fuels our feeling of being stuck on the outside, that we can't really make a difference in the political system because who are the candidates going to listen to? Us little folks or the big ones who write the big checks? And a poll by the nonpartisan Pew Foundation in 2018 showed that more than 70% of Americans believe people who write those big checks do have more influence than the people who write the little ones. Election officials in Portland are very aware of that belief.
So polls have been showing that over 90% of Americans don't believe the government works in their interest, that it works only in the interests of large campaign donors.
That's Susan Matei, the director of something called the Small Donor Elections for the city of Portland. I'd never heard of it, so if you haven't, don't feel bad. But she is running a program that I think is fascinating and really worth our time tonight. We've blasted the city for its many failings, but this might be a bright spot of success. And you should know about it no matter where you live, because your local elections folks should really look at this and consider doing it. Here we go. In 2016, the Portland City Council approved a change in the rules for financing campaigns for positions like city council or mayor or auditor. The idea was to get those big check writers out and the small donors in. The city set up a system that is optional for the candidates. If they agree to take part, they get free money from the city for their campaign, and then they have to live by some strict rules. They do not have to take part if they don't want to, but then they lose out on the free money. And here's how that works. A candidate declares they're running, let's say for city council seat number 2, for example. They begin gathering campaign donations. They need to get at least $5 from 250 different people who live in the city of Portland. Then once they hit that amount, they qualify for an incredible 9-to-1 match on the first $20 of each donation. Did you get that? 9-to-1.
Any Portlander who gives a participating candidate up to $20 gets their contribution matched 9-to-1. So if you give, we like to say the city adds a 0. So if you give a candidate 20, the city matches at 9-to-1, that's 180, becomes $200 for the candidate. In exchange, that candidate has to, first of all, collect a lot of small contributions from a lot of Portlanders to prove that they have enough public support to be worthy of the matching funds. And they also have to agree to campaign finance rules, so they can only take $250 from an individual per election, and outside of some small limits for in-kind contributions that they can take from, organizations. They can't take, contributions from like entities and whatnot.
So there's about 30 places in the country that have programs like this, but I think Portland's might be the most aggressive. Again, here's how it works. City council collect contributions from 250 different people. Folks running for mayor need to collect 750 individual contributions, and not everyone loves it. For example, during the last election, our mayor, Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler, did not take part. But back to the current election. Once the candidate qualifies, the first $20 that they get from any Portland resident gets them that 9-to-1 match. People can give more than $20, but it's only the first 20 that's matched. So if someone gives $10, the city kicks in another 90. If someone gives $20, the city kicks in another 180. Each candidate can only get a maximum of $200,000 from the city for a primary election. Once they hit that limit, they can still fundraise, of course, but there's no more city match. Not surprisingly, in the last election, the candidates who used this system loved it.
So actually, our first election cycle was the 2020 election cycle, and afterward we did user research. We've talked to people who gave to candidates, the candidates themselves, their staff, their volunteers, and what we heard was that this really freed them up from having to make a bunch of phone calls to raise a lot of money, and instead they just went straight out and were talking to voters. That raising small contributions just became part of meeting people and hearing about their concerns and what they are looking for government to do. So they felt much more like they were campaigning and talking to the people and not just raising money.
And I wonder if the people who were giving the donations felt like they were playing a role and that their small amount actually could make a difference.
I mean, that's almost a word for word what we heard, that people were excited to learn that their $5, $10, $20 wasn't getting overwhelmed by a small number of large contributions. The program's goal is to make sure that it's Portlanders who are funding our elections, so that once people are elected, they are beholden to all Portlanders, not a small number of large campaign donors. And what people who know about the program do feel like finally, they do matter, and that they will be listened to.
Sounds pretty cool, huh? In the past, the average contribution for city elections was about $1,000. But in 2020, when this new system was used, the average dropped to less than $100. That gave the people writing the little checks a much bigger voice. But wait, there's more. The city is tracking lots of data and presenting it on a website that you can use and see where the candidates are getting their money. You can get there by going to openelectionsportland.org.
So you go to the dates section and you type in from the beginning of the election cycle, which was December 18th, 2020. And that filters all of the data visualizations to this election cycle. So you can see this map, and the dots are according to the size of the contribution. And so what you see is that there are no big dots. There used to be very big dots. And then you can also hover on them and it'll tell you which campaign received how much and how much of a match they received. All candidates who've raised at least $4,000 this cycle are participating in the program. And then you can see how many contributions they received from how many donors, the median contribution, total private contributions, and total matching funds. And then they can see what types of donors they've received money from, and then how much of those contributions are from very small donors to larger donors. 100 to 250 is the mostly the largest donor. They can take small amount of in-kinds that are larger than that, and a small amount of seed money that's a little larger than that, but that's all. And then you can see if it came from Portland, from Oregon to outside of Portland versus out of state. And you can see that Portlanders are dominating the elections now. Individual donors, no entities, businesses, etc., are dominating the elections, and that it's virtually 100% of it's coming from donors who give $250 or less.
Now, I might be a bit wonky, but I think this stuff is fascinating. It's a look at how elections can be run with everyone taking part, not just the folks with lots of extra money. It's important, and we'll be talking about this a lot more as we get closer to the primary election in May. Most of Oregon did not recover from the drought over the winter, especially the central part of the state. But now that we've got snow dumping in the mountains, will that help hard-hit areas get through the summer?
We're in essentially a 3-year drought, and then last year it intensified. This drought, if we drew a line from Eugene to the southern Multnomah Mountains, it's going to take multiple years.
When the story continues. Questions and comments to the story at kgw.com, or give us a call and leave a voicemail. 503-226-5090. Feel free to let us know what you think about the emergency shelter idea, or what do you think about that campaign finance program that we just explained to you. We'd love to hear from you. We want it to be an interactive conversation. Hey, let's take a look at the latest drought map for Oregon. This is what things looked like a week ago, which is the last time the map was updated. You can see a huge part of Oregon is in the extreme or exceptional drought. That's the darkest part there, and it has been that way since last summer. That includes the Klamath Basin in southern Oregon, where there just has not been enough water to go around for either the farmers or the tribes living there. The winter didn't really help things, and now here comes the spring. But our spring is off to a weird start with a bunch of snow dumping in the mountains. So what does that mean for our snowpack and for the areas still in extreme drought conditions? Let's have meteorologist Joe Ranieri explain.
Pat, over the last couple of days up at Timberline Lodge, they have seen nearly 4 feet of snow. That's absolutely incredible for this time of year, considering we're approaching mid-April. But despite those gains, much of the state is still seeing a deficit with the snowpack. This winter and spring has seen highs and lows in the Cascades.
When we think about the last few weeks in December and early January, we were very optimistic in terms of snow accumulation across the state, because all major basins were above that 1991 through 2020 median value by the time we hit January 6th. At that point in time, however, the valve shut off.
There were several weeks in parts of January and February where the snowfall seemed like it stopped. Those gains we made to start winter slowly started to disappear.
So we had a pretty significant decrease in the amount of snow water equivalent, what we watch in terms of for water supply. The storm has rebounded those numbers.
The latest storm has helped, but not enough. There is less snow in the mountains right now than there was this time last year.
Last year at this date, we were 144% of that median value. So still, it's not as much as we had last year. The problem we encountered last year was the rapid melt-off, which started essentially the second week of April.
That really hurts our drought-stricken state. more than 90% of Oregon is under a drought, except for a pocket of the northwest side.
Yeah, we're in essentially a 3-year drought, and then last year it intensified. This drought, if we drew a line from Eugene to the southern Wallowa Mountains, it's going to take multiple years.
Scott Oviatt is a hydrologist with Oregon Natural Resources Conservation Service. He says he isn't worried about the Portland area, but he's concerned for the southeast side of the state.
Optimism is for water for obviously the Portland region and some of the irrigators on the east side of Mount Hood. That's an excellent point. But as we move south, concerns are there, and there will be water shortage.
A concern that could take years to finally see improve.
So, Joe, what are state hydrologists looking at over the next couple of weeks?
Well, they're going to be paying close attention to what the temperatures might be. Of course, you remember this time last year, we saw a very warm start to April. In fact, last spring was one of the driest on record. There's a handful of days last April where we saw temperatures anywhere from the low to the mid 80s. That happened about 2 or 3 different times. Heading into the next couple of days, though, really the next several days, we're going to be seeing below normal temperatures and plenty of rain over the next few days as well.
And you've talked a lot about the snowfall on Mount Hood, but does that really help central or southern Oregon when it all melts?
It helps a little bit of the northern Oregon Cascades and through parts, a little bit of central Oregon, but for the most part, the Klamath Basin that you mentioned, they depend on mountain snowfall coming down from Crater Lake and the southern Oregon Cascades. And as you saw from that map in my story, I just showed you that much of that side of the state has been seeing a deficit for the last couple of years and a drought at least the last 10 to 12 years.
It's amazing how wet it can feel here and how dry it is there in places like the Klamath Basin. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. Now, let's get to a viewer question. Jean asked, why has the city of Portland not renewed its contract with Friends of Trees? In fact, a lot of people are wondering that. Someone walking past my home asked me that just last weekend. Jean and the rest of you, fantastic question. We've profiled Friends of Trees before on the show. They're a nonprofit organization which partnered with the city for the last 14 years to plant trees. But you're right, the contract with the city's Bureau of Environmental Services is ending June 30th. According to Friends of Trees, this specific contract, valued at about $1 million a year, is what has funded their efforts to plant 40,000 street and yard trees around the city, especially on the city's east side and in lower income areas. That doesn't mean the city has completely kicked Friends of Trees to the curb. The Park and Rec Bureau has a separate 5-year contract that's valued at about $130,000 a year with Friends of Trees. That contract does remain intact. Gene also asked us, why now? Just a couple of weeks ago, the Portland Parks and Rec reported the city's tree canopy has been declining since 2015. And I don't have to remind you of that 116-degree heat dome we experienced last summer. Trees play a huge role in cooling off our homes. So let's get back to Gene's question. Why now? Well, it turns out both the Bureau of Environmental Services and the Portland Parks Department have tree planting teams. BES issued a statement explaining that with Parks creating its own program focused on street tree planting, it saw an opportunity to change the BES tree focus, and it reads in part, BES saw an opportunity to shift its tree planting focus to private property, specifically commercial, industrial, and multifamily properties. The positive responses BES received from partnering businesses and property owners has been heartwarming. And because of that shift, it looks like BES is not going to need Friends of Trees any longer. The Bureau also pointed out it did extend its contract with Friends of Trees to the end of June this year. Coming up, how many of you like the movie Apollo 13? Or maybe you remember watching the news when those astronauts made it back home 52 years ago? We're going to speak with an Oregon woman who had a front row seat to the entire thing. That's when the story continues. 52 years ago this week, astronauts aboard Apollo 13 radioed Houston and said, "We have a problem." Most of us know how that story ends, either from being alive at the time or watching the Tom Hanks movie. But tonight, we're reliving the story with a woman from Tigard who was married to one of the astronauts on the mission at the time. John Goodwin spoke with her.
When you walk in those doors, you feel like you're part of the family.
Monday, April 11th, called for a celebration at Summerfield Estates.
Well, my goodness, it's been 52 years since that flight went.
The Tigard retirement community honored the incredible story of the Apollo 13 mission. A new resident has quite the connection. whose last name begins with H.
H-A-I-S-C.
Say hello to Mary Hayes. She's the real star.
She was very nonchalant about it.
Well, you know, I'm 87 years old. It's been a long time ago.
Mary's then husband was Fred Hayes, the lunar module pilot and one of 3 astronauts who survived the catastrophic accident. They were supposed to make a moon landing, but an oxygen tank exploded in the service module.
And I could see through my entranceway into the family room and the TV. And Walter Cronkite was saying they've had an explosion on Apollo 13.
At the time, Mary was 7 months pregnant and 200,000 miles away from her husband.
It went a while, it really did. But then all of a sudden, there were those 3 parachutes. It was just, I thought it's a miracle. And I did look up like that. So
This necklace is a symbol of a happy ending.
this went around the moon. It is the same as the patch of Apollo 13.
She's got such a warm, beautiful soul. And she's more than willing to share this amazing story and do it so gracefully.
Angela Lyle is Summerfield's Community Development Director. You've got to have a cake at a celebration like this and a hot dog buffet, a nod to the crew's launch of the "Is a hot dog a sandwich" debate.
That's Time magazine.
Scrapbooks were on display along with Mary's stories, like the one time she flew on Air Force One with the Nixons.
Mrs. Nixon came and made him get out of the bed and put me in it and said, "She's pregnant, you get out." And there was one bed on Air Force One at that time.
A few years after the mission, Mary and Fred divorced. He lives in Houston now, but they remain close.
We dated in high school, so we had a long history.
Mary loves to relive the history of Apollo 13, a unique perspective of NASA's finest hour.
It was a difficult time, of course, but looking back on it, the miracle of them getting back alive dominates what I think.
In Tigard, John Goodwin, KGW News.
Thanks for bringing us that story, John. Keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. When we come back, how you can make a difference in our community. For this week's Hey Help campaign, we're asking you to donate to the Free Clinic of Southwest Washington. They provide free basic health and dental care to uninsured people and underserved communities in the region. One of their big goals is to keep people out of emergency rooms, which is often where people without health insurance end up. The clinic relies completely on donations and grants. If you'd like to help out, just hold up your phone's camera to the QR code that's on your screen right now. Or you can also go to kgw.com/heyhelp. This, by the way, is a micro donation drive, so feel free to give any amount, no matter how small or, of course, how big. That's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. But remember, the story, our story, that never ends. I'll see you tomorrow.
This is KGW News at 6:30.
And we